the maestro of the event this evening. Take it from here, Connor.
All right, everyone. Sorry, I'm Connor Bentley. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Relations at Westminster. And like Heather was saying, we're thank you for joining us. And like Stephanie was saying, thank you for bearing with us. We did have some issues with the Zoom link, but we will be posting this online too. So if you have friends that weren't able to get in, let them know that we will have this recorded for posterity, and people can look at it later. I just want to thank and introduce our speaker tonight. Spencer Barclay is the founder and CEO of Saveology, and he is also a double alum from Westminster College as a BA in economics from Westminster in 2013 and his MBA in 2014. And just so you all know, because we do have a lot of people on the call tonight, if you have, Spencer will kind of talk and then we'll do Q&A. If you have questions, everyone is muted, but do them in the chat and just send the chat to me, and then I will kind of facilitate those questions as we move through this evening. But if you have questions while Spencer's talking, send them over as soon as they come to you, and I'll just kind of curate the questions as we get to the end. And now I will turn it over to Spencer.
Thank you, Connor. I appreciate the invitation to be here. Before I jump in, I did have one question, which is because of the technical difficulties in getting started later, do you want me to plan on the same approximate hour, 40 minutes content and some questions, or did you want to try to abbreviate it a little bit?
I think we can try and, keep it as close to what we had. I mean, I think we'll just, if we need to abbreviate the Q&A a little bit, we can, but I think we'll try and be conscious of people's time, but hopefully people can stick around a little bit as well.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So I have my screen shared here for the presentation, Personal Finances During a Pandemic. We are going to cover a few different things today. I'll probably start by telling you a tiny bit about myself and the company Saveology, and then we'll jump into some of the bigger problems with personal finance that have arisen from the economic and financial events that we've had recently. And probably the thing people are most waiting for is the tips on how to respond to the pandemic, how to recover from a recession, and prepare for the next one. So that's kind of the game plan for today. So my name is Spencer Barclay. I started Saveology about a year and a half ago. Graduated from Westminster in 2013 and again in 2014. And my background for the last 10 years has been primarily in financial related services, personal finance, credit, real estate planning, retirement planning, health savings, and now financial planning. So I like to think that I've been preparing for this presentation for 10 years. And I hope to be able to share a little bit of what I've learned through that period with you to help you through a tough time like we're going through now. So the reason why we started Saveology was because of some of the problems that Americans face with personal finances. And this is especially applicable to my generation, to millennials. These statistics support that. So 95% of Americans save less than recommended. 90% are underinsured or are missing key insurance policies. 66% have less than $1,000 saved for an emergency, and 78% haven't done any estate planning. Now, that there are certainly exceptions to these numbers, and they're hit or miss with different people, but what it does do is paint kind of a negative picture of how Americans are with their finances. And a lot of people think the solution is in financial literacy. And a recent study done at Duke University found that financial literacy doesn't strongly correlate with results. In fact, less than 1% of outcomes were dictated by financial literacy. And so there's got to be something deeper. And when I left the last company that I had sold, I wanted to solve the problem of millennial finance. So I did a lot of research into how we could do that. And ultimately, we found that traditional financial planning had some of the greatest impacts, but isn't as accessible as it could be. So that's where Saveology came in, is we built the business model to provide free financial planning in 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes, you would come to the site, you answer questions about your personal profile, and it generates a full financial plan that tells you where you are right now, where you're projected to be, and then the specific things that you can do to improve your finances. So I tell you a little bit about that so that you understand where I'm coming from and why we're able to share this advice. Not only have we had 10 years of experience in different areas related to personal finance, but this is what we do for a living now, right? We help people with their personal finances. And those range from people who are barely getting by on minimum wage or in poverty, all the way up to high net worth individuals. The financial planning can have an impact for anyone because it's personalized for who you are. So what's happened recently, right? With the outbreak of coronavirus, we've seen broad social and economic changes. And I just want to highlight a few of those. So the first one is the market crashed. A lot of us felt this, right? 34% is what the S&P 500 fell from its peak in February, I think it was around February 19th, down to the trough, which was towards the beginning of April. But it has since recovered by 17%. So yeah, we felt that as an economic blip early, but it's recovered a little bit. Unemployment, on the other hand, hasn't been recovering. We were at 4% unemployment, and we've jumped to 18% unemployment. This means that 22 million people are now jobless. They've applied for these unemployment benefits. And in terms of GDP, or gross domestic product, then we've seen a big impact on what this is forecast to do. So we were growing at around 2% per year, and we're projected to contract as an economy by 3%. And so overall, that means 5% fewer total transactions and volume of transactions. And that impacts us personally, right? Those are broad numbers, but a lot of us have felt this in our day-to-day lives. So this means that your retirement savings or your investments probably took a hit, right? When the economy crashed and the stock market went down. 22 million people lost their jobs, which means you might have been one of those. Households across the board took pay cuts. Maybe you were one of those. Small businesses are hurting, right? I own a small business. I feel that and see the impact of this. And other small businesses have it a lot worse off, where they don't have foot traffic coming in. So maybe you're a small business owner and feel it that way. But more than likely, this has impacted some area of your personal finances. And so we want to help you with those. So our goal will be to talk through three main things. The first one is how to respond to a pandemic. Next is how to recover from a recession. And the third, how to prepare for the next one. Now, in an ideal world, we would probably start by talking about how to prepare for a recession, but not all of us did that already. So since we're in the state we are now, we're first going to address responding to the existing pandemic. And then if we have enough time, we'll focus more on the preparing for the next one. So our hope here will be to cover a broad enough array of topics that it will apply to everyone in some fashion. And you might notice a little bit of overlap between tips for these three areas. So my recommendation would be, we have a total of around 15 tips. And my recommendation is that you look for one or two that stand out for you as things to focus on going forward. Don't try to do everything at once, or you'll probably get a little bit lost. So starting with responding to a pandemic, we're going to cover 6 key tips to respond to a pandemic. And there are hundreds of other things to do, so we tried to boil it down to 6 things that you can act on relatively immediately. The first one, some people like to skip over, and that, I think, is to check your mindset. So even though a lot of financial decisions should be logical, we more often find that we make them emotional. Our financial decisions are based on emotions and in response rather than proactively and logically. So stress and panic compound these times and impact our judgment. So this is where what we like to call the 72-hour rule kicks in. When we are in the middle of a pandemic, the last thing we want to do is react. So the 72-hour rule in personal finance is, before making financial decisions, take a few days to think about it. This was primarily created for large purchases and applies even outside of pandemics. But it can also apply to things like buying or selling stock, taking out a loan, or getting credit cards, or anything else. So if you have the brief thought, I need to sell my investments, apply the 72-hour rule. Check your mindset. Don't panic. Don't respond to these. Rather, proactively make decisions. And if you still feel that way after doing a little bit of research and giving it a couple days to think, then you can make those larger financial decisions. The other thing that this does is panic tends to enhance problems, right? It spreads to people around you. So the last thing you want to do is have everyone else feel your panic, especially for those who are closest to you, like your family. So the first tip is to check your mindset and don't panic. The second one is equally simple, which is to make sure everyone's on the same page. This is especially true in an immediate household, or if you are in more strenuous circumstances. So if you're getting by similarly to how it was before the pandemic, you might not need a big sit-down meeting. But if you've had a job loss, a pay cut, if you're feeling pressure as a small business owner, that's a great time to sit down with the people who are closest to you, which could be a spouse or partner and kids, and walk through that situation with them. So I recommend a quick process, which would be sitting down together with every member of the household, preferably all together, but at least one-on-one, and be transparent about the things that are going on in the household. The kids, teenagers especially appreciate this. I have a 6-year-old, and he asks from time to time how things are going. Because life has been different for him over the past few months, and it's been even more different for him since we started a new company 15 months ago. So give everyone a chance to ask questions and voice concerns. And when you're sitting down together as a family to talk about those finances, new things can come up and you'll be able to address feelings so that people feel comfortable. And oftentimes with personal finances, the way you feel about it is just as important as the reality of it. So when you create that dialogue around finances, hopefully you'll be able to communicate what the next several months look like. And throughout that period, you'll have better communication. So I wanted to apply this to a quick example, which might not have come directly from the pandemic. But when I was looking at starting my own company again, this was in January of last year, I sat down with my family and I said, hey, my plan is to leave the company we're at right now. They had purchased my last company and I had stayed with them for about 18 months. And I told them I wanted to go out and do it again. And that, for some people that are risk adverse, is a hard pill to swallow. So we had to talk about what that meant, right? Where are our finances? And we set some specific goals to say, hey, so we know now for this period, for the next 18 months from January of last year, we probably won't take a paycheck, right? We talked about that. What does that mean for us? Does this mean that we're poor, right? We explained it to our kids. No, it means we don't have income coming in, but it doesn't mean that we don't have savings to live on, but that also means we probably want to be frugal. And we want to make smart money decisions through this period. So I found it to be very helpful to have a sit down, get on the same page meeting. And that was even at a good time. I can imagine it's even more important to do that in a financially stressful time. The third recommendation here in responding to the pandemic is one that people don't like to hear. And that's to create a budget and a spending plan. So I probably more than anyone have a very healthy dislike for budgets. They can be restrictive and time consuming. And most of the time, I don't even have a strict spending plan. I am one of the financial professionals that knows there's a better way than just having a budget. But in times of distress, which could be job loss or pay cuts, an emergency, a recession, it is super important to consciously budget, to rethink about your finances and to plan a little bit more carefully. So those who are feeling comfortable during this time can still benefit from it because they might not know what's going to change at the drop of a hat, and you should be ready. So I say that because a lot of us are also in that position where we think the only way COVID-19 is affecting us is by having to stay at home, right? Not getting a haircut for an extra 5 weeks. Like that's how we think it impacts us. But the employers who laid off people were often employers that were in great financial situations. It just doesn't make sense for them to keep employees. So anyone can lose a job at the drop of a hat. So my recommendation is to be proactive about it and say, hey, we're in a tough time right now. Even if I feel safe, let's be a little bit more careful. And this means that you can draw up a conscious spending plan for what you're going to do. So to relate that to the last story I told, I've been working on this company, Saveology, for about 16 months. And for the first 14 months of that, I didn't take a paycheck, which means I was burning cash. I was spending all my hard-earned savings. And when we started out, we were in a great financial position to do that. And we planned on 18 months without pay. But when the 12-month mark rolled around, this was early January, I started stressing a little bit. I'm wondering, is 18 months going to be enough? Do we need to make bigger changes? And I wasn't sure when that first paycheck would come. So what did I do? Well, me and my wife, we revisited our budget. We didn't just cut spending. That wasn't the goal, but rather we started to spend more purposefully. And within 2 months, we had already made enough changes to extend our runway longer than if we needed it. We ended up not needing it. Luckily, we did start taking a paycheck eventually. Things have worked out really nicely for the business. But taking the time to put together a budget and spending plan, I think helped us feel better about it. So if you just lost your job, you might need to double down on this. In that case, you might need to take a plan or to make a plan that will take care of just your necessities and cut out all discretion. But if you're not in that scenario, at least be conscious about your budget and your spending. So next, the recommendation would be to protect your income sources. So this overlaps a little bit because some of us feel good about where we're at, right? You need to have a plan either way for your employment or your unemployment. You don't know what that always is going to look like. But if you are one of the fortunate ones to still have your job, my advice is to not assume or expect anything from your employers. Small businesses and large businesses are impacted by this. And in times like this, it's impossible to predict what will happen. So quick story on this one. My father-in-law is a dentist. He owns his own practice. For years, it's provided a great living for his family. And I think most people assume that dentistry is recession-proof. But apparently it's not pandemic-proof. So the state of Oregon, which is where they are living, has all dentist practices currently shut down except for emergencies. So you're probably thinking, hey, as a dentist, he's making good enough money. He's probably okay. He is fine financially. But what about his employees? A lot of those people are living paycheck to paycheck, and they never would have thought that their hours would be cut without notice. So what does that mean for you? Here's what I recommend doing if you haven't already done this. First thing would be you should proactively look for ways to demonstrate your worth with your current employer. We all get complacent in our jobs. And while no one is indispensable during a global crisis like this, you can certainly aim to be the least dispensable on the team so that you're the last one they get rid of if that comes about. This could be things like improving your education, seeking new training, performing at a higher level, maybe staying after or coming early, things to demonstrate that you're a valuable component of the team can protect your income. Second, I recommend to sit down and talk with both your employer and your colleagues. In some cases, it might just be a manager or a supervisor, but at least you can talk to them and learn where the company's at, and you can explain where you were at. And this isn't a time to be begging for your job or protecting it, but it's a time to get on the same page and maybe to reinforce the value of what you're there and why you're important. And if you're in a position to do so, like a small business owner, you might want to talk to clients and suppliers to see how that might affect them. My dad's a small business owner as well. He owns a tree nursery. And in times like this, their biggest threat isn't not selling trees. It's not getting paid by the people who are the wholesalers that are buying their trees. So it's nice to get on the same page with them. And then finally, on this point, I would prepare for the worst. Even if you have a great job, make yourself marketable. So I would say that if you haven't dusted off your resume yet, you're already behind. Not only should you always be taking care of your resume, but at this time you should absolutely be revisiting it, update your LinkedIn profile or create one if you don't have one, and then expand your network. Keep your eyes out for opportunities, because it's always better to have an opportunity on the back burner than to not have one when you need it most. So I mentioned these tips to help you protect your income. If you don't know where your income is coming from, if you're a household with multiple incomes, I also recommend mapping that out so you can decide what sources might change in the future and how you need to protect those two. Fifth on the respond list is to get your investments in order. So this is one that I probably would have led with, but I don't think it's the most important. It's just the one people think about really quickly. So selling your investments at this time could be a terrible plan. People panic and they like to pull the trigger on doing that to protect the downside risk. But I want everyone to say this to themselves right now with me. The markets will recover. The markets will recover. It's how it's happened over the past 100 years. After every recession since the implementation of the stock market, it's always come back, right? I showed you the graph that showed that it fell 34%, has already recovered 17. If you were one that sold when it had fallen 34%, you're not going to make back that extra 17. You already lost it. It takes that much longer. So an example of this would be, despite the massive tech bubble collapse in 2001 and a global financial crisis in 2008, an investment that was worth $10,000 back in 1999 or 2000 would be worth $35,000 today. So the moral of the story is to keep your money invested and weather the storm. Now that's one side of it. I caution you not to sell during this period. But what else do I mean by getting investments in order? So I think the first would be to take inventory of your investments. Were you properly diversified in the first place? If not, make a note to change that for the future, right? Were you too heavily invested in equities or bonds? You might need to revisit that with a financial professional, but make a note of that. Don't make big changes right now. That's not the goal, but think about where your investments were at and if you were ready for a recession. If you are, however, in a good position, then you might consider buying right now while the markets are down. So leading up to this economic blip, I had become a little more uncertain of the economy, and more of my accounts had started shifting towards cash holdings. I didn't know if we had a recession coming. I definitely didn't predict an economic blip or a pandemic like this, but I felt like a lot of the companies I owned were overvalued, and so I started putting more in cash. So in my primary investment account, I had about 30% cash, and when the markets dipped, I started buying with that 30% cash. And I've since benefited from that recovery of 17%. So while I might not be up overall, because I was in a good position to do that, my primary portfolio is only down 5% from the peak. So I didn't get hit by the whole 34% or even the 17%. By having some available in cash, I was in a good position to do that. So I like to think about the recession ahead of time, and we'll talk about that more in the preparing for the next recession section. All right, finally, the last tip in Respond is to take advantage of legislative changes where applicable. So this isn't the point of the webinar today or the presentation, but I do want to name a few. So small business owners and even some 1099 freelancers and consultants have access to payroll protection programs, have access to grants, SBA loans, and state disaster loans. Those who have lost their jobs qualify for enhanced and extended unemployment benefits. Some people who have 401ks qualify for penalty-free withdrawals and loans. And of course, there's stimulus money coming that can be claimed for households. So keep your eyes peeled on not only these ones and how they might help you, but future ones to come. The Senate just passed another initial bill that could provide additional stimulus and might help each of us. There are even small changes like on the HSA front, where new things qualify for health savings dollars that didn't previously qualify. So if you were in a tough position or you want to improve your position, look into the legislative changes that populate most news feeds nowadays and see if there's anything you can do to take advantage of those. So here are those 6 again. My recommendation is to take note of 1 or 2 that you want to focus on. And if you have any questions on these, make a note and we can try to address them a little bit more in the Q&A. So check your mindset, don't panic, make sure your whole family's on the same page, create a budget and a spending plan, protect your income, get your investments in order, don't sell prematurely, and then take advantage of legislative changes. That's how we respond to the pandemic. So the next phase is to recover from the impacts of the pandemic or a recession. Most economists aren't sure if this is an economic blip or a recession. Recessions tend to take place over a 3-month or longer period of time, so it could be recession. But either way, we want to recover from it eventually. So here are the 4 tips for this phase. The first one is to return to the fundamentals. So a lot of people think that finances are really complicated and that you'll never be able to succeed if you don't understand everything about finances. But in reality, while we do have a complicated financial system, it's absolutely not true that you need to understand it to be successful. So if you remember one of the statistics I showed earlier, financial literacy had less than a 1% correlation with financial outcomes, which means people are successful all the time without knowing the ins and outs of the financial system. So let me tell you why I think that this is. I think that for some of the people who are most knowledgeable, they overcomplicate finance. they skip the fundamentals and they jump ahead to the advanced stuff. And some of those people that I know who are the worst with their personal finances are people like financial advisors. And I'm not even joking. These people who are advising other people on their money often overspend to impress, or they invest in complex and risky products. And so your knowledge alone isn't what you need to be successful. The very most basic fundamentals of personal finances, keeping it simple, can have a big impact on you. So some of those things, the fundamentals are, I mean, I would guess you could identify the fundamentals. Things like having a plan for your money, keeping a budget, spending less than you make, focusing on improving your income and building an emergency fund, saving 10 to 20% of your income. You don't need any specific financial knowledge to do any of those. Everyone I know can spend less than they make if they put their mind to it and develop the discipline. Everyone can work on building an emergency fund regardless of the income. And those are the fundamentals. So I ask, what two factors have the biggest ability on your retirement? And the answer is that your savings rate and how early you start saving are the two biggest factors, and they're 100% within your control. They're part of the fundamentals. So sometimes we think that, they're so simple, we overlook them, but we overlook how critical it is. So when you are starting to recover financially, I think it's a better time than ever to reset your habits back to the fundamentals. Second, in the recover section, is to set short-term goals. So you'd be amazed by the power and the impact of goals. So in financial planning, as we do it, long-term goals are usually the focus. And in recovery, I recommend setting a few short-term goals as well. Write them down, share them, and talk about them. So a few examples of short-term goals that we could talk about. One could be, I will stick to a budget for the next 3 months, or by December of this year, I will replenish my emergency fund. If you're looking for a job, one could be, this month I'll apply to 15 job openings or contact 50 people on my LinkedIn network for help. Or I won't eat out on the weekdays for the next 2 months. Or I'll increase my 401k contributions to take advantage of the company match. So they're very simple. They're easy to do. They're not long-term, but these little wins create large long-term impacts. So maybe take a minute to talk with your family or to think about your own goals and what you could set, and create a few little wins for yourself. Then, once again, I'm going to talk about the budget. So revisit your budget. So you may have noticed I've mentioned it several times, and this is partially because it's a fundamental, but also because it's impactful. It's one of the biggest things you can do to change your behavior. So I already told you that I don't always budget. I don't like budgeting, but even though almost anyone could benefit from a budget, most people don't do it. So let me just say this about it. If you emerge from this pandemic with the same spending habits as you had before the pandemic, you're doing it wrong. You're missing out on a big opportunity. So ask yourself, what matters to you less now than it did before? Is it eating out? Have you got used to not eating out? Or is it trips to the movies that you have since cut out? Reprioritize the things that matter more right now. Toilet paper, food storage, board games. A lot of people probably learned to love board games over the last little bit, and maybe you're reallocating your budget to cater to that. So I've actually heard of a lot of people, mostly on Twitter and social media, that have spent next to nothing during quarantine because they're indoors all the time. And they've saved hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And you don't need to do that. You don't need to take it to the extreme. But why not ease back into it all, right? If you were spending $1,000 a week, why can't you try to get by on $700 a week? Don't spend 100% of what you were spending before the pandemic. Maybe just do 75% and save the rest. So you'll still be in a better position than you were during lockdown, but your fun life will be none the wiser to what you were missing out on. The final step that I have in recovery is to let your investments recover. So I mentioned before not to sell them, but I want to reemphasize how important it is to let them recover. So avoid selling your investments, especially out of panic. Tapping into your 401k should be a last resort. We mentioned some of the tax advantages, and I do want to let you know that they're there for a reason, which could be if you need the help, but you were actually originally set out for them to be a retirement benefit and your retirement savings. So that's what they should intend for. And we don't know if this is a single dip V-shaped recession or a W-shaped recession. So I can't tell you when the right time is to buy or sell. But all I know is that seeing all of this right now, I can say that selling in these situations will almost always leave you worse than if you were to hang on to those investments. It might take a year or two for them to recover back to the levels that they were, but in the case of your retirement, it shouldn't be going anywhere anyway. I even recommend to some people to forget that it exists and ride the roller coaster of the market, continue contributing and making investments into your 401k or your retirement plan so that it will be ready for you and you're buying when it's down. So here are the 4 tips to get on recovery. Return to the fundamentals, set some short-term goals, revisit your budget, and let your investments recover. So take note of any of those that you want to focus on. And if you have any questions on those, make a separate note and we'll try to address them in the Q&A. All right, this is the last section. So this is prepare. I start wondering right now, are we done yet, right? We were originally scheduled to get done at 6:30 and I'm feeling it more than anyone because my voice is getting tired, but luckily we're getting close. So here are my 5 tips on preparing for the next recession. The first one is to create and stick to a financial plan. So I've been waiting for this moment, right? It's finally time for me to tell you to create the financial plan because that's what we do at Saveology. So first, let me tell you why we need financial plans. In our market research, we found that households with financial plans are 2.5 times more likely to save enough money. And that's super significant. We couldn't find any other variable that determined savings rate effectiveness that worked better than financial plans. Income didn't correlate as heavily. Budgets didn't correlate as heavily. Having a financial plan did. So now let me tell you what a financial plan really is. A financial plan is, let's say, a strategic game plan for achieving your future goals across all areas of your financial life. So essentially, it should tell you where you are now and how to get to where you want to be going. And an effective plan would also include a strategy for savings, a strategy to manage your risk, maybe tax optimization, should include an estate plan and a roadmap for your retirement. And if you have all those components now, like some of it might not seem actionable from day one, but it sets your sights or your long-term goals on what you need to be doing. So some of you might already have financial plans. Statistically speaking, about 15% of Americans have financial plans, even though it should be 100% of Americans. There's not a real good reason to not have a financial plan. So many that do have financial plans created them from a financial planner. They went in, met with an advisor, probably paid a lot of money to do that. A few might have created a plan on their own. Either way, congratulations on getting a plan. The average financial plan costs about $2,000, and that's why it isn't accessible to all that many people. And so in some cases, planners or advisors won't even talk to you if you don't have a high enough net worth. But because of how important a financial plan is, we wanted to make it available for everyone. So I'll brag just for a minute about Saveology. We built a platform to provide fast and free financial planning. So in just 5 minutes, you can build a plan that can help you get on track or stay on track. So our free plans provide you with a report card to tell you how you're doing, a financial plan to see where you're heading, and then probably most importantly, a very specific action item list to help you know how to get started and how to prioritize. So I'm not going to tell you, just go to Saveology.com to get a financial plan. Instead, I'm going to tell you to make sure that you get a plan any way possible. You can go pay an advisor for one. You could hire a friend to do it. You can sit down and learn how to build it on your own. I don't care how that is. My recommendation is to create a plan so you know where you're heading and then stick to it, right? Ebbs and flows happen in life, but if you know the direction you're going, I think it'll be easier to get there. So Saveology.com is a great place to go to build one that will serve as a good starting point, but go get one no matter the resource you use. The second tip in preparing for the next recession is, I think about it as most people in today's society love to spend, right? The problem is that we're trying to keep up with the Joneses and we hate saving. And so we fail to save as much as we need to. So the recommendation here is to learn to live on 80% of your income. So millennials, or people between the ages of, say, 25 and 40, my generation, are particularly bad at this. I can say that because I am one of them. Millennials have an average savings rate that's net negative, which means on average, we spend more than we make. So student loans, credit cards, they're not helping out with this, but there are certainly some people that have figured it out. There are some people doing a good job, and we can and should only be spending about 80% of what we make, and then put away the rest for our future, which might be a rainy day or might be retirement. Either way, living on less than we make. So if the pandemic showed you that you can spend less because of your time in quarantine, then start doing it. But if all you saw is that it's painful to go through a recession or to lose a job or to take a pay cut, then you already know that you need to be ready for the next one. So not only will it make it easier if you're already spending less if another recession comes, but it makes it easier on the heart to have an emergency fund and to have a secure retirement in the future. And learning to live on 80% of your income is a great way to start that. Some people like to recommend automating this. So they take 20% of their paycheck up front and put it to the side and only spend as if they have 80%. At that point, it doesn't matter what you spend that other 80% on. It matters that you put away 20% in the first place. The next one is another fundamental. So this is to build an emergency fund. I've mentioned this before. I'll mention it again. An emergency fund is absolutely essential. For most people, I recommend a 6-month replacement supply of income. But if you're in a high-risk job or you are in commission-only sales, it might need to be more than that. 12 months might work. If you work in a union, very stable, maybe it's only 3 months, or a job that you can go get anywhere else. It might not have to be quite as long, but in all cases, you can and should have some money set aside to be touched only when you really need it. And without an emergency fund, it could take years to recover from the economic and financial impact of a setback like a job loss or a medical emergency. And people forget that. The emergency fund isn't just to keep things going as it is, it's also to prevent your personal finances from getting derailed or prevent people from getting stuck in the poverty trap. The fourth one in preparing is to get a basic estate plan in place. So when we're young, we think we're invincible. We think nothing can happen to us. And so we don't prepare for it, right? I caution otherwise. So you need to get a basic estate plan in place. Estate plans aren't just for old people, even though it helps to have one in place when you're older, but they're becoming increasingly important the older you get. And when you're young, it's easy to put one in place. It doesn't have to be as complicated as when you're old, but at least have something in place. So the pandemic just killed 182,000 people. I think that was today's number. And I doubt that any of them were expecting to catch it, right? Let alone die from it. And yet 182,000 people did. So my recommendation is, first, if you have kids, you at very least need a guardianship nomination, which is a document to tell the courts who should take care of your kids if something happens to you. Everyone has someone in their family that they know they would not want their kids to go to if something happened to them. And the courts don't consider that unless there's a legal document in place. Likewise, if you have a spouse or any kids or any assets, I also recommend a will. Now, back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, you had to go to an attorney to get these documents. It cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars to do it. But now they're easier than ever to get. You can go online and build a will for $100. Even the most simple one is better than not having one at all. And like Saveology, for example, we sell personalized guardianship nominations on our site for $50, right? We have a partner that provides them. We link to it so you can build it right there. Easy as that to provide the peace of mind that you need. Our friends at another company called Trust and Will, they do a whole will for anywhere from $70 to $130. You're telling me for $130, I can build a whole estate plan that could last me for the next 10 years. Like, that's a no-brainer in my opinion. I'm not sure of any better way or a more cost-effective way to keep peace of mind than setting up a very basic estate plan, which also includes things like a healthcare directive, which wills can have that say, if something happens to me, how do I want my health to be treated? Who do I want to have access to my healthcare information? And those are important considerations that we don't think of when we're young and healthy, but there are 300,000 people who have experienced COVID that are probably wishing they had more in place, and it might be a little late for them. The last one, and on this prepare list is to protect against risk with insurances. So insurance isn't a fun thing to talk about. In fact, personal finance in general is relatively boring, but it's important. And insurances were built for the exact purpose of spreading risk across a broad population. So if you have a provider in your family, or if you are a provider in your family, it's absolutely irresponsible to not have term life insurance, right? Those 182,000 people are probably feeling that right now. And in many cases, it also makes sense to have disability insurance, right? Long-term care insurance or private unemployment insurance. There are lots of other options out there. So I'm not blanketly saying that you should go get all these, but rather carefully consider which ones might benefit you and put them in place at a time when you're doing well financially and you feel good. A good financial plan should tell you which ones are appropriate based on your own circumstances, and unrelated to recessions or pandemics, there are certain ones you need, like home and auto and health insurance. So I definitely recommend protecting against risk with insurances. So we've just covered a lot of information. If I was a professor, we probably could have spent a whole semester on these concepts alone. Instead, we did it in less than an hour. Since we don't have that long here, I wanted to leave everyone with some food for thought, and that is a quote that says, "We start by setting the course, we succeed by staying the course." So in my opinion, this is so true in personal finances and in retirement planning. If you can decide now what you want, you can set your goals on how to get there. And yes, you might have to make course corrections along the way, but you'll constantly be making progress. Even in periods of economic uncertainty like these, you're still moving towards a bigger goal. But if you don't know what that goal is, if you haven't set the course, it will be harder to stay the course. I wanted to thank you all for joining today and give a special thanks to Westminster for making this happen. And I think I'll turn it back over to Connor to moderate some of the questions if any came in.
Yeah, so I know we're a little over our original time, but I mean, it looks like most people are, we've had the same group here the whole time. So if everybody's okay, we'll take, maybe 10 or so minutes of questions just to kind of keep it on a decent timeline for everybody. I know it's getting close to dinner for a lot of people, but we do have a couple of questions already, so we'll just kind of take the ones that we have, and if anybody has any other ones, just do them in the chat to me and I will relay them to Spencer. So the first one we have goes back to that kind of early slide, Spencer, about helping children understanding finances. And so just curious about any tips on how to help children understand finances during a pandemic or otherwise, and how to help them learn good foundational financial literacy and habits from a young age. So you talked about having a 6-year-old. A lot of people on the call probably have kids. So what are some thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think during the pandemic time might not be the best time to get them started on learning finances on their own. But it is the best time to make them feel involved in finances, right? They can know a little bit about the finances of the family. And that's the primary tip that I was getting to, is make sure they're involved and know what is going on. But it's never too young to start teaching them good financial habits. I've seen a lot of really effective ways of doing this. I think it starts with helping them understand the value of money. I think a lot of people my age haven't learned the value of money. So some of the things that I do with my kids are, the first one, we make them earn money. It's not like we give them a job, even though I had a job when I was pretty little with my dad. We give our kids money for chores that they do, and we make them understand what that money can and can't buy. Like, that's a very fundamental concept, but kids really early on adapt the behaviors of what they see. So if they know they earn money and spend money, that's what they're going to become accustomed to. If they learn we earn money, we save some money, we donate some money, and we spend what's left over, then you'd be surprised at what that has of an impact on even the family finances, right? My kids will ask for fewer things when they understand that it takes $10 to buy this toy, and $10 is equal to 5 or 10 of their chores. They can tie those two together. So at a very young age, start with not necessarily things like an allowance, but things like earning money. And then at a little bit later age, maybe early teenage years, help them understand money by helping them manage their money, setting budgets, earning money, tracking your bank accounts, balancing a checkbook. It might be a thing of the past, but seeing what your balance is and what you've spent and what you're spending isn't. It's digital nowadays, and there are a lot of cool tools out there to help teenagers start down that process. And don't pretend like it's only their money at that point. Yeah, they might have earned it, but it's part of your stewardship to help them make good choices in doing it. So I guess the number one recommendation is to be actively involved in it, and that might mean teaching yourself some of those concepts first so that you can teach them later.
Nice. Well, that sounds good to me. I hope that was helpful, and to all of you out there. And then another one: are there any particular industries that you think are good buy opportunities, where good buy opportunities might exist right now?
So I don't like to make recommendations on specific investments. I will say there are some industries that are at super lows. I'm more of a value investor. There might be a few growth stocks that I own, but I believe in buying when things are depressed. Things like oil right now are at an all-time low, and we know that our fossil fuel dependence isn't going away for 10 years. So I'm not telling you to go buy oil, but look for opportunities like that, a sector of the economy that has gone down. So compare and contrast that with people who are currently buying Zoom, right? Everyone has become introduced to Zoom, and there is no telling that Zoom stock is going to go up in the long run because they've had a temporary surge. So I don't look for things that are trendy. I look for things that are depressed. If I were to add a couple, I'm happy to share some of the companies I've been investing in recently. I doubled down in Dropbox, in Under Armour, in Dell, local companies like Domo and Pluralsight, an electric car company called Plug, Microsoft, Health Equity. Like these are good companies that have taken a hit from this economic blip, but their fundamentals haven't changed. So that's what I'd look for. The fundamentals of either an industry that has been hit or a company that will end up in a better position and will continue the course.
Nice. Are there any other questions that anybody has? Those are the ones that we had in the chat. A couple comments saying thank you and saying that this was very helpful. So that's great. Anything else from anybody before we close up? Give a chance for another question. Okay. Doesn't look like anybody has any real hot takes right now, but I'm going to just turn it over to Stephanie to kind of just sum this up. But I personally want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I'm sorry that we had the technical difficulties. We will be posting this, and we'll send this out to everybody as well in an email. So look for that in the next couple of days. And we also have some other online events coming up, and Stephanie can kind of talk about our next one from Alumni Relations. But thank you all, and thank you, Spencer, and thank you, Stephanie.
Well, thanks, Connor. And Spencer, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to do this for us. And you provided a lot of great reminders and a lot of things that I haven't personally thought about for a long time. So thank you for reminding me to think about those. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And I hope that this was also beneficial for you. So as Connor mentioned, we do have another seminar coming up on May 6th, and it is in conjunction with the Alumni Office and the Career Center. And they're going to be talking about how to manage your career during this time, whether you have found yourself unemployed and need to conduct a new search, or you're currently employed and you need to rethink how you do your planning moving forward. So we're really looking forward to that. So keep an eye out on the Facebook pages and via email for registration information for that. And I also wanted to do a plug for the Gore School group. So if you are a graduate of the business school, we would love for you to follow us on our specific Facebook and LinkedIn pages. You can find us at the Westminster Gore School of Business Alumni. And we post events like this, also some tips every once in a while. So please follow us and stay in touch with us. So this concludes tonight's event. We hope you all have a great night and that you stay safe. Thanks.